skills 5, 6, and 7 all go together. So the notes I'm creating here go for all of patterns and relationships. The technical name of skill number 5 is organizational pattern. And then the technical name of skill number 6 is relationships between sentences. And then the technical name for skill number 7 is relationships within sentences. So they each are their own kind of question. But the fundamental things you have to think and the kinds of words and clues that you're looking for are all the same, no matter if you're doing patterns or relationships. I want to also take us back to the beginning of class when I introduced text, and I talked about the 3 dimensions, because here's where we are on this map. We are looking at not what the text is about, we're not even looking at why the text is written, but now we're focusing on how it's put together. Not how it sounds like tone, that will come later, but how it's structured. So we're looking at the structure or the format, and I like to call it the technical way that a passage is put together, how it's constructed. Whereas tone, later, I'm going to call that the emotional way that it's put together. So as I mentioned, skill number 5 is organizational pattern. Organizational pattern is a skill that is for the whole passage, the entire passage. So it is something that is a general overview kind of skill, whereas skill number 6 is starting to zoom in and get more specific, because skill number 6 is a relationship between sentences. So between means you need to have 2 or more. And typically your test questions will have 2, and then on occasion it'll have 3 or 4 or even 5 sentences that are kind of short sentences after one, and the question will completely let you know whether or not you need to include, the next one or 2 after or whichever. We'll see some examples. But the idea here now is we're zooming in. And so we're looking at a few details and how 2 or more details relate to each other, so we're getting more specific. We will be doing the same thing that we did with organizational pattern, except that zoom in, where we're looking in a different location. So rather than looking at the entire passage from the beginning throughout the middle and to the end, and asking ourselves what's the overall organizational pattern, when it gets to relationship between, you will not read the whole passage. In fact, I discourage you from reading the whole passage when you do relationships between and when you do relationships within, because relationships within get even more specific. Notice a sentence. So this is one sentence. Now that one sentence can have 2 parts. It can have the introductory fragment and then an independent clause, or it can have an independent clause with a fanboy and an independent clause. So it can have parts to that sentence. It can be a compound sentence, but the idea is that there's something going on inside of that sentence. So we will be looking at one detail. So this is, I guess, if that's specific, then I'm going to call this micro. And again, what I was saying is that you should not read the whole passage for relationship within or relationship between. That's too much information. You'll have a lot of clutter in your head if you have the entire passage, because what you're supposed to do for these is focus on only those 2 sentences, or if it's a relationship within, only that one sentence. So here we are on our map of the semester. Now, a few connections to where we've been. Notice organizational pattern is general. It's the whole passage. Remember, skill number 1 was main idea. It was also a whole passage kind of skill. It dealt with the overall of the passage. And so it was, of course, general. Organizational pattern should match with main idea. Now it's not a match the way main idea and purpose were a match. It's this way. Whatever, notice the whatever the passage is about should be told in a way, in a format or a structure that fits with that particular content. So let me give you a real simple example. Who or what is the passage about? Let's say it's about cats and dogs. Real common topic that almost everyone knows something about. So let's say the overall passage is about cats and dogs, and then let's say it's about how cats and dogs are different. So the topic was cats and dogs, and now the controlling idea is the differences between them. And so put that together, our whole main idea is the differences between cats and dogs. I did not word that in a very good complete sentence there, but I'm going to say it. There are many differences between cats and dogs. So if this is what the entire passage is about, I would expect that the pattern gives some way, some structure, some format to discuss those differences. Which organizational pattern would help us accomplish that? It would have to be something, some way of talking about cats, some way of talking about dogs, putting them side by side, one detail about cats and one detail about dogs, side by side. Another detail about cats, another detail about dogs, side by side. That overall is emphasizing their differences, and when you do that, it's called contrast. So if all you saw was the word contrast, you may not think that it's connected to the main idea. But now look at the main idea. The main idea has something about the differences between cats and dogs. Well, what's the meaning of contrast? Difference. So there is a connection between the pattern and the main idea. What the passage is about should fit with how the passage is put together. The reverse is true. The way that a passage is put together overall should help the main idea get told. That's not all. Of course, when we did skill number 4, author's purpose, it was also of the, I'll go down this way, of the whole passage. So it was also an overall kind of skill, looking at the general level of the text. All right, so we used purpose to help us with main idea. We used main idea to help us with purpose. Whatever the text was about needed to be related to why the author was telling us about that stuff, and likewise, if the author wants, for whatever reason, to tell us about that stuff, there's a certain way he or she's going to have to do it. So the why, the how, and the what all work together to accomplish the overall meaning of the text that the reader gets. So as a reader, trying to figure out, with all of these reading skills, what's the passage about, why is it written, and how is it structured, you can use these general skills to help you. You can use one question on the test to help you with another question on the test, and another question on the test, as long as they are all the general kinds of questions. I'm going to talk next now about relationships within and between, and get into all of the specific kinds of relationships, and then we'll move forward from there.